Some rejections come with shouting, others come with silence, and Christine's eldest daughter Aspen seems to have chosen the second kind. By the public accounts, Aspen has kept her distance from her father Kody, declining the kind of relationship most people assume a daughter and father would have. She didn't stage a dramatic confrontation. She didn't air it all in a blow-up. She just quietly closed the door. And in a family where so much drama plays out loudly, that quiet boycott from the eldest daughter might be one of the most powerful statements anyone has made. So tonight, I want to talk about Aspyn Brown and her quiet distance from her father, with the care and respect a real person's family relationship deserves. Let me start with who Aspen is, because she holds a particular place in this family. As one of Christine's eldest children, Aspen was among the first of the Brown kids many viewers really got to know. She was one of the first to marry, and her wedding was a significant on-screen milestone for the family. She built a life and a family of her own relatively early, stepping into adulthood and motherhood while much of the audience watched. So Aspen isn't a peripheral figure. She's an eldest daughter, one of the family's foundational kids, someone whose relationship with her father carries the weight that eldest child relationships often do. And that's exactly why her distance from Kody is so significant. When the eldest steps back, the younger ones notice. Now, I want to be careful and precise because this is a real person and her real family relationship, and I'm not going to fabricate private details. What's publicly known is a pattern of distance. An eldest daughter who, by various accounts, has kept her father at arm's length and is not close to him. I'm not going to invent the private specifics of why or claim to know the contents of their relationship. What I can do is talk about the visible pattern and what it represents in the context of everything we know about this family. So let's treat this as what it is, a publicly apparent distance handled with discretion, rather than a tabloid exposé of a private family matter. The dignity of the people involved matters more than any dramatic framing. Let me talk about why the quiet kind of distance is so striking, because I think it's actually more powerful than a loud one. A dramatic public estrangement with accusations and confrontations is in some ways easier to dismiss. People can call it temporary, a phase, the heat of a moment, but a quiet, settled distance, the kind where someone simply, calmly maintains their boundaries and lives their own life, reads as something more permanent and more considered. It's not a person lashing out. It's a person who has made a decision and is calmly living by it. And that kind of calm, settled boundary is much harder to argue with or explain away than any dramatic blow-up. The quiet boycott says, this isn't anger, this is a conclusion. And let's think about what it means specifically that it's the eldest daughter, because eldest children often set the tone for the others. The oldest kids are, in a sense, the first to navigate the relationship with a parent into adulthood, the first to establish what the adult-child dynamic is going to look like. When the eldest establishes distance, it can implicitly give the younger siblings permission to honor their own feelings too. Aspen, as one of the eldest, drawing a boundary with her father may have been a kind of early signal in the family, a sign of a pattern that other siblings would, in their own ways, follow. The eldest daughter's quiet boycott may have been the first clear instance of a dynamic that came to define the whole next generation's relationship with Kody. Let me connect this to the broader pattern we've traced across this entire family, because Aspen's distance is a piece of it. We've documented again and again how the Brown children have largely drifted from their father, while remaining close to their mothers and to each other. Aspen is a clear example. Her distance from Kody, alongside what appears to be a strong bond with her mother Christine and her own family, fits the pattern exactly. The kids gravitated toward where they felt loved and secure, and for many of them, including apparently Aspen, that wasn't centered on their father. So Aspen's quiet boycott isn't an isolated story. It's one daughter's version of the family-wide truth, that the children, by and large, did not find in Kody the kind of relationship that would keep them close. Now, I want to be genuinely fair here, because there are always two sides to a parent-child estrangement, and I don't want to flatten this into a simple story. We're seeing this primarily from the outside, and primarily through the lens of a narrative that's largely sympathetic to the wives and kids. Kody surely has his own perspective on his relationship with Aspen, his own sense of what happened, his own pain about the distance. Estrangements are rarely entirely one person's fault, and a daughter and father growing apart usually involves a complicated history that outsiders can't fully see. So, while I understand and largely sympathize with the kid's distance from Kody, given everything we've discussed, I want to acknowledge that Aspyn's boycott has a private backstory that belongs to her and her father, not to us. We're seeing the outline, not the full picture. But here's what I think we can say, even with that fairness in mind. Adult children don't typically maintain a calm, settled distance from a parent they had a warm, secure relationship with. Distance like Aspyn's usually reflects something real, accumulated over time. People don't boycott a parent who made them feel deeply loved and prioritized. So, while I won't claim to know the specifics, the existence of the distance itself tells us something. It tells us that, for Aspyn, the relationship with her father reached a point where keeping her distance felt healthier than staying close. And that's a sad thing, but it's also, in many cases, a self-respecting thing. Sometimes maintaining distance from a relationship that hurts you is an act of self-care, not cruelty. Let me talk about Aspyn's own family, because I think it's an important part of her story. Aspyn married and started building a family of her own relatively early, and there's something meaningful in that, in the context of her distance from Kody. Often, when people step back from a difficult parent, they pour their energy into building the kind of family they wished they'd had, into being the parent and partner they needed. Aspyn focusing on her own marriage and her own children while keeping her father at a distance may reflect exactly that instinct, the instinct to build something healthy and to protect it. Her quiet boycott isn't just a turning away from something, it's a turning toward something else, toward the family she's chosen to build and prioritize. That's not just rejection, it's a redirect. I want to reflect on the courage it takes to maintain a boundary like this, because I don't think it's easy. We live in a culture that places enormous pressure on people to maintain relationships with their parents no matter what, to forgive, to keep the door open, to prioritize family ties even when those ties are painful. So for an adult child to calmly maintain distance from a parent, especially publicly, especially in a family as watched as this one, takes real conviction. Aspyn is, in effect, withstanding the cultural pressure to perform closeness she may not feel. And there's a quiet strength in that, in honoring your own truth about a relationship rather than performing the version other people expect. Maintaining a boundary in the face of that pressure is its own kind of bravery. Here's a question worth sitting with. Could this distance ever be repaired? Because that's the open question that hangs over every estrangement. And the honest answer is, it depends on things we can't see, and one thing we can name. Repair would likely require genuine change and genuine effort on Kody's part. The same kind of humble, sustained, action-based work we discussed in the context of his apology tour. A daughter who has calmly closed a door doesn't reopen it because of words. She reopens it, if at all, because of sustained, demonstrated change over time. So whether Aspyn and Kody ever find their way back to closeness depends largely on whether Kody is willing to do that work, and whether Aspyn ever feels safe enough to let him. The door isn't necessarily locked forever, but the key is in Kody's actions, not his words. So when I step back and look at Aspyn's quiet boycott, here's what I see. I see an eldest daughter who, rather than staging a dramatic rupture, calmly and quietly established distance from her father and turned her energy toward the family she's building. I see a boundary that, precisely because it's quiet and settled rather than loud and angry, reads as considered and permanent. I see one daughter's version of the family-wide truth that the kids drifted from Kody. And I see, in her calm distance, a quiet strength, the willingness to honor her own truth about a relationship despite all the pressure to perform otherwise. Aspyn didn't slam the door. She just gently closed it and walked toward a life of her own choosing. And sometimes, that quiet closing says more than any shouting ever could. Let me place Aspyn alongside her siblings for a moment, because the contrast in how they've each handled their father is illuminating. Within Christine's children alone, you see a real range. Mykelti has been more publicly vocal and visible in discussing the family. Gwendlyn has been openly critical and outspoken. And then there's Aspyn, who seems to have chosen the quietest path of all. Not loud criticism, not public commentary, just calm distance. That range tells you something important. There's no single correct way for these kids to process their relationship with Kody, and they haven't all chosen the same one. Some speak out, some shed the name, and some, like Aspyn, simply, quietly, step back and say very little. Each is a valid response to a complicated father. Aspyn's just happens to be the one that makes the least noise, which is exactly why it's so easy to overlook and so worth paying attention to. I think it's worth dwelling on her wedding because it was such a meaningful on-screen moment and it adds poignancy to where things stand now. Aspyn's wedding to Mitch was a milestone the audience celebrated, one of the first of the next generation to marry, a hopeful moment for the family. And weddings are, traditionally, one of the great father-daughter occasions, loaded with symbolism about a father's role in his daughter's life. So, to go from that hopeful wedding chapter to a present where she keeps her father at a distance is its own quiet arc. It's a reminder that these relationships have history, that there was a time of more closeness, or at least more hope, and that the distance now didn't come from nowhere. Whatever happened between then and now, it represents a journey, not a switch that flipped. And journeys like that are usually paved with accumulated disappointments rather than single dramatic breaks. There's real psychology to the dynamic between eldest daughters and difficult fathers that I think applies here. Eldest daughters often take on a particular role in families. The responsible one, the one who grows up fast, the one who sometimes ends up parenting their own parents emotionally. And when an eldest daughter with that kind of history reaches adulthood and finally has the autonomy to set her own terms, she sometimes uses it to step back from a relationship that asked too much of her or gave too little. It's a way of reclaiming the boundaries she may not have been allowed to have as a child. I'm speculating about the general pattern here, not about Aspyn's private experience specifically. But the dynamic of an eldest daughter calmly establishing distance in adulthood is a recognizable one, and it usually reflects a long history rather than a recent grievance. Let me talk about Aspyn's boundary models for the next generation, because she's a mother now, and that matters. Her own children are growing up watching how she handles her relationship with her father. And whatever the specifics, she's modeling something for them. The idea that you get to set boundaries, even with family, even with a parent, when a relationship isn't healthy for you. That's actually a valuable thing to model for kids. So many people grow up believing they owe unconditional access to anyone who shares their blood, and they carry that belief into relationships that hurt them. Aspyn, by calmly maintaining her boundary, may be teaching her children a healthier lesson, that love and access are not owed automatically, that you can honor yourself while still being a good person. That's a gift to pass down, even if it comes wrapped in a sad family situation. I want to address a phrase directly because I think it's at the heart of this, and it's the idea that a child owes a parent a relationship. Our culture pushes this hard, the notion that no matter what, you owe your mother or father closeness, contact, forgiveness, access. But the healthier truth is that relationships, even family ones, are earned and maintained through how people treat each other. A parent's biological role doesn't automatically entitle them to a close relationship with their adult child, regardless of how that relationship has gone. Aspyn doesn't owe Kody closeness simply because he's her father. If the relationship reached a point where distance felt healthiest for her, then maintaining that distance isn't a moral failing on her part. It's a legitimate choice. And recognizing that adult children are allowed to choose their boundaries is part of treating Aspyn as the autonomous adult she is. It's interesting to contrast Aspyn with Paedon, because between them you see the two poles of how the siblings relate to Kody. Paedon, as we discussed, is the lone defender, the one who pushes back against the anti-Kody narrative. Aspyn is, in a sense, the quiet opposite, the one who calmly keeps her distance. And both are siblings. Both lived in this family. Both formed their own conclusions. The fact that the same family produced both a defender and a quiet boycotter tells you once again that there's no single truth about who Kody was as a father. He was a different father to different children, and they've responded accordingly. Aspyn's quiet distance and Paedon's loud defense are two honest responses to a complicated man, and the gap between them is the gap between the different relationships each of them had with him. Let me reflect on the loneliness of this for Kody, because even as I largely understand the kid's choices, there's a human sadness in it that's worth naming. To have an eldest daughter who keeps you at a distance, who built a beautiful family of her own that you're largely on the outside of, is a profound loss for a father. Whatever his failures, and we've documented plenty, there's a real grief in a parent watching a child calmly close the door. I don't say this to excuse anything. I say it because this whole family story is, at bottom, a tragedy, and the estrangements are the saddest part of it. Aspen's distance represents not just her self-protection, but Kody's loss. The cost, paid in the currency of a relationship with his eldest daughter, of however he conducted himself as a father over the years. The bill, once again, is coming due. And maybe that's the note to end the analysis on, because it captures the whole quiet tragedy. Aspen's boycott isn't dramatic. There's no villain twirling a mustache, no single explosive betrayal. There's just an eldest daughter who, over time, concluded that distance from her father was healthier than closeness, and who has lived by that conclusion with calm dignity. It's the kind of quiet family sadness that millions of people recognize from their own lives. The parent and child who simply grew apart, not in a blaze of conflict, but in a slow, sad drift that hardened into distance. Aspen's story isn't sensational. It's just true, and human, and a little heartbreaking. And in a family that has given us so much loud drama, her quiet boycott may be one of the most honest and most relatable stories of them all. So I'll turn it over to you, and I'd ask that the comments stay respectful, because we're talking about real people and a real family wound. Do you understand Aspen's choice to keep her distance from her father, or do you hope for an eventual reconciliation? And here's the bigger question for the comments. Do you think the eldest children, like Aspen, set a tone that the younger Brown siblings then followed in how they relate to Kody? Tell me where you land, because I read every comment, and the conversations about these parent-child relationships are some of the most thoughtful this audience has. If you want me to do a respectful look at Christine's children specifically, and how each has navigated their relationship with their father, let me know, and I'll build it with care. And if you appreciate that we handle these family estrangements with genuine fairness and discretion, instead of turning private pain into spectacle, then do me a favor and subscribe, because that kind of respect is exactly what we aim for here. And there's so much more of this family's story still to understand.